Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links video. So we just had the GRF and it was very dominated by one specific deck, that being Gaia the Fierce Knight and Gaia variants, because the skill is very unrestrictive. So we did see Gaia Metarian being basically what almost everyone was on, and we did see Gaia Hero, some pure Gaia, and a couple of other decks sprinkled in, all pretty much making up the majority of the event. So here we have some of the results, and as we can see here, 72 of the top 100 decks were Gaia Metarion, 3 were Gaia Pure, 1 was Gaia Hero, 1 was Pyro, but they were also playing Gaia, so we're also going to count this as a Gaia. 3 of them were Metarian, but they were using the Gaia skill, the Celerity skill, and 21 were unknown. But we do know that 100 out of 100 were Archive skills, which means it is almost guaranteed that all of them were Gaia. There might be a couple of different things that did kind of creep in, such as Pure Hero or maybe a Sidra, but almost certainly all 100 were Gaia. So this is basically a tier 0 format. So with that in mind, we are going to be seeing a new ban list coming soon, new limits, new restrictions, and some new skill reworks, because we get one after every KC Cup and every GRF. So we're going to basically do our wish list / predictions of what we think might be coming in that upcoming list. So what better place to start than the Gaia skill itself, Chivalrous Celerity. So this skill is completely bonkers, and this skill is going to need to see some sort of nerf. Now the obvious nerf is that we really want to change the skill so it locks us into only summoning the Gaia fusion monsters. Being able to play the elemental heroes and the Metarian cards really does tip this over the edge and make it completely bonkers. Being able to summon Metarian Ashura Star is just really, really good. You can pop any face down card, back row, or monsters. You can then, if your opponent has warriors, absorb all of their attack, which is kind of gross. We also did see Type Change Beam make a big appearance in the latter half and the latter stages of Stage 2, which just created a bunch of really unfun OTKs. So the first thing I'm going to do is restrict the extra deck when using this skill. So there are a couple of different ways you could do this. You could lock the extra deck so you can only use monsters that are level 7 and lower, but then that still lets you use the heroes. We could change it so that it only lets us use magical knights and dragons. That would basically lock us into just the Gaia fusion monsters, but that will let other things creep in as we go forward. The safest thing is probably to straight up lock it to Gaia names in the extra deck, but that might be a little bit too heavy-handed. I don't know if it's necessary to do that, but this definitely needs a hit. That being said, I still think being able to add 2 cards to your hand, it is only once per duel, but 2 cards at once is really, really good, especially since that's almost an entire fusion boss monster. It's really, really strong. So potentially as well, I would also change this skill to be twice per duel, but make it so that you can only add 1 card each turn. So once per duel, you can search Polymerization. Once per duel, you can search a normal monster. I personally think that would be a really good change because, again, just getting a free +2 and that +2 being pretty much an entire boss monster is pretty ridiculous. Even if we do take away the Metarian and the hero parts of this deck is still going to be really, really strong. And basically using your skill to just get a free boss monster is really, really crazy. So I would probably make that change. At the very least, I think we limit the extra deck. If it was me making this change, kind of my wish list, I would also change the skill so that we don't just get that free +2. Next up, we're going to talk about Dragias Nova. And Dragias Nova is kind of the elephant in the room. So if we nerf the new best deck, that being Gaia, basically we're expecting the old best decks, that being dragons and psychics, to kind of fill the void. Now, Dragias Nova is a really frustrating skill and a really frustrating deck. The reason being, the skill is annoying because you get to search cards based on the amount of high attack, high level monsters your opponent has, which means your opponent is incentivized to not go aggressive unless they can get some serious damage in or unless they can kill you, which does lead to very unfun game states. As well as the fact that the dragon player themselves is not really incentivized to do anything until you go aggressive against them. So what it ends up being is both players sit there with a bunch of defense position monsters and nothing happens. And eventually the dragon player draws out all of the combo pieces they need to make their big fusion monsters. They'll push in and try and get a load of damage in or try and OTK you. And OTKing your opponent has become a lot more doable since Dragias Star has been introduced to the game, which does make it very, very powerful. So I think Dragias Nova will come back into popularity, assuming Gaia gets hit. And this is just not a very fun deck anymore, unfortunately. So I would like to see this skill also get a hit. I think this deck plus is way too much, right? The amount of times I've played against the Dragon player and they've resolved a Triad Drago and a Pot of Greed, and the Dragias Nova has given them 2 more cards, and they've just like +4'd out of nowhere. They get to summon out 2 really big bosses. They also get to wipe out your back row. It's not fun. It's not particularly fair. I would really like to see this skill hit. And the main way I would like to see this get hit is 1, take away the requirement to gain cards based on the attack of your opponent's high-level monsters, because again, that incentivizes playing very passive, and I think it's very boring. And 2, I would also like this card to shuffle cards back from your hand into the deck, so you don't just get the freely plus off of this. Because basically getting a free +2 is really, really strong, especially when they're 2 cards that you desperately need for your combo to work. So I would really like to see this changed as well. I think a Dragias Nova nerf is due. So next up, we're going to talk about our limit 3s, cards that we really think should be at 3. And the first card we're going to talk about is Metarian Asura. So first off, I should preface, I don't predict Asura is going to get hit. This is my wish list, right? Realistically, I don't see a UR getting a hit. I also don't see one of the anime characters and playable characters' boss monsters, their main ace, getting hit. But I think Metarian Asura should go to 3. This card is really, really strong, and realistically, as long as Metarian can keep coming back into the meta in the future, if we get any skills that don't lock your extra deck or don't lock you into using specific monster types, any of those decks can just keep using things like Metarian as like a small engine. And Asura is definitely the most overpowered of the Metarian fusions. Being able to pop any face down card is really strong, as we've seen in the Gaia deck. Being able to also OTK your opponent just by finding Beam, or if your opponent's just playing Warriors because Warriors are meta for whatever reason, it's really, really good. Asura is so good. Basically, this meta, a large part of it being so toxic and a big part of Metarian Gaia being really, really strong is Asura. And the last time we had a deck as dominant as Gaia Metarian is right now was Metarian during the Metarian format. And again, that was really overpowered because of Asura. So this is a trend. The 2 most dominant single deck metas that we've had in Rush Duel Links have both been because of Metarian. So I do think Metarian does need another hit, even though individually the Metarian deck on its own isn't anything super crazy. Like, the deck is still fine, it's still powerful, it's still probably like high rogue / bottom of tier 3. The deck is still fine. It's just a little bit weaker now because if you can't guarantee that you get that fusion, the deck can feel a little bit off. But as we said, if any new skills come out that do allow us to play Metarian cards, we can just put them into that deck and it will find a new home, it will rise to the top of the meta again, and we'll be back in this one dominant deck format. So I think Metarian does need a hit. I personally would hit Asura. But the other card that I have seen people talk about is Sword Dancer. Now specifically, the world champion, QuantumCubes, has specifically said that his hot take is that Sword Dancer should go to 3. And I think this makes sense because this is just a N rarity card, which means they are more likely to hit this. Sword Dancer to 3 would basically do a very similar thing to hitting Metarian Asura to 3, which is basically reduce the number of limit 3s you can play in the deck. Realistically, you're going to have to play 3 Sword Dancer, which means you'd have to cut other limit 3s out of your deck, such as the Star Restart. So I don't dislike this. I think this is more likely to happen than Asura, but I still don't think it's going to happen. That's just because it feels really weird to just randomly hit Sword Dancer to 3. Now, if you think about it logically, it does make sense, right? It does hurt the deck, which is the intention. The whole point is we don't want Asura to be played in just about anything. And this does mean if you do want to splash a Metarian package and something else, you can still do it with Serpainter and Ritra. You don't need specifically the Sword Dancer to work in that. But again, it does feel a bit weird to hit Sword Dancer kind of out of the blue. Next up, battle-tested Gaia the Fierce Knight. It makes sense to me that this card should be limit 3. Gaia being as dominant as it is, and still being able to use any limit 3 cards it wants is kind of disgusting. You can play Secret Order, you can play Ghost Cyclone, you can play Star Restart, you can play any of the other limit 3s in the game. Every other deck has restrictions on it, basically to say you can't just play whatever limit 3s you want, so why doesn't this deck? Realistically, this is the best deck in the format. Even if the skill does get a hit, if it's not hit too heavily, Pure Gaia will probably still be really, really strong. So I would really like to see Battle Tested go to 3, which would then maybe have people debating whether or not they want to play something like the Star Restart or something like the Secret Order with 2 copies of this instead of all 3. Next up, Illusion Strike Dragon Mirror Gears, and this is another card that I don't actually think will get hit because it is a boxed UR. That being said, it has been reprinted, so maybe there's a chance, but it's unlikely. Realistically, I think having 5 dragon boss monsters is a little bit too much for the dragon deck. Basically, you have to find one of your bosses in order to get your combo going, because without a Mirror Gears or a Dragias, you can't make one of your fusions. So by having 5 copies of these, which is typically the number we've been seeing, it makes the deck really, really strong. By putting this to 3, that now cuts it back down to 3, which does slow down the dragon deck quite a lot. And it would mean you'd either have to do a 2-1 split of Dragias and Miragias, or you'd have to remove one of them from the deck altogether. Overall, I personally would like this change, but I don't think it is very likely. I think one that's more likely to happen is possibly Triad Drago to 3. And this is, again, not my original thought. Someone else did suggest this, but Triad Drago to 3 does make a lot of sense. Triad Drago is a really good card, and again, as we discussed at the beginning, your opponent Triad Dragoing into Pot of Greed into Skill to +2 is quite common against the Dragon deck, so I think Triad Drago going away would be really, really nice, because again, a free +1, sometimes being used more than once in a turn, is really strong, especially in an OTK combo deck that wants to just blast you out of the game, out of nowhere. And now we'll go on to the Limit 2s. And the Limit 2 card we want to talk about first is Jam P Start. So, as we said before, if Gaia gets a hit, it will probably be brought back in line with the other decks, which means Dragons and Psychic will rise back up and kind of fill the void and be very powerful. Now, if we're nerfing Dragons already with this list, with, again, primarily my wish list, I think we also need to hit Psychic a little bit, and I think Jam Start 2/2 is the way to do so. This is a really good consistency tool. It also is another way to just get the life points of the Psychic deck much, much higher. So the problem with Psychic, typically, is that either the deck sits there and spams their life points up so high that most decks can't deal with it anymore, or they'll just combo off and OTK you out of the game. So we can't necessarily do a lot about the OTKing part of the deck, because we have already got some like trap cards we can use to try and slow it down. There is stuff we can do about that, but if your opponent's life points just get too high, there's not really anything we can do about that. So I think Jam P Start down to 2 does fix that problem a little bit. It also then would conflict with negate attacks, so now you have to decide, well, do I swap off my legend, or do we only go down to 1 copy of Jam Start? And I think, again, having a way to restrict the ways that you have to get to candy is a good way to kind of hurt the deck without killing the deck. Because you can always still find candy, right? You can use the skill to search Bear, summon, get the candy from the graveyard, you can send the candy to the graveyard using the skill. So there is still ways we can get to it, but I think having 3 copies of Jam P Start is maybe a little bit too much, gives you a little bit too much life gain and a little bit too much consistency. But that is it for the Limit 2s. I think that would be basically it. So now we'll talk about Limit 1, and this is Limit 1/ban, and this is Type Change Beam. I don't think Konami wants to ban any cards, I think it's still a little bit too early for that, but Type Change Beam really needs to go down to Limit 1. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but Metarian has been the culprit for the 2 most one-deck dominant formats we have ever had in Rush Duel Links, and a big part of that is Type Change Beam. Basically, as long as this card is in the game and Ashura Star is in the game, combine them together, we get a big OTK machine, and anytime we can splash those cards in anything, which is quite a lot of the time, we just always have access to this ticking time bomb. So I think Type Change Beam has to go. I think most players are fed up with this card. Even players that really like Metarian still really don't like this card. Now again, if you can't play Ashura Star with Type Change Beam, if we could like choice restrict them, then it will be fine. I think Type Change Beam being played with Hercules Star is really powerful, but it's fine. Being played with Vitra Star, again powerful, but it's fine. The issue is when you combine it with Ashura Star, you can just OTK your opponent out of nowhere, which means they are now disincentivized to go aggressive and go wide, which is always a really negative feeling. You don't want to ever feel like you can't go wide, you can't play your deck the way you want to play it, because your opponent might Type Change Beam you and the game might just be over out of nowhere, which always really sucks. So in my opinion, I would actually ban this card. I don't think it's going to get banned, so I'm going to say limit this down to 1. And now we'll talk about some unhits. We do this every single time we do one of these videos, but I think the unhits are important. First up, Swift Gaia the Fierce Knight. I think if we're limiting Battle Tested, we unlimit Swift Gaia. There's no real reason for this to be limited. And by extension, I also don't think Dark Sword Magician should be limited. Both of these cards basically are just big bodies that can get out kind of easily. And I understand why they were hit earlier, because we were at a point where the game was a lot slower and getting out these big bodies like really easily was seen as a negative. But the game is sped up now, right? We don't necessarily need these cards to be limited 3. It does seem a bit weird. And even if they weren't limit 3, I don't think we'd suddenly see a ton of play with them. Swift Gaia, I think, makes sense to unlimit because, again, we want to limit Battle Tested, so just free this, then we can still play them both together. Dark Sword, I don't even know if this card would see play even if it was unlimited, so why not? Then we have Yami Ruler. Yami Ruler, again, is a card that is limited because Konami is worried about floodgates, and already we have Yami Tarasu limited, which does drastically limit how we can actually use this card. But if we unlimit Yami Ruler, suddenly we could play things like 2-star Restart and 1 Yami Tarasu and have that as an actual playable deck again, because the Celestial Warrior deck is fine, it's just very handicapped. As soon as Starry Start got limited 3, it made the deck almost unplayable, so it would be really nice to be able to free that deck up a bit, because I really don't think this deck is going to be doing anything otherwise. Then we have Shining City Knights. I still don't understand why this card is limit 3. It could come off the list. There's no real argument for it to stay on the list. Just release Shining City Knights. Then we have Gaia the Shadowflower Beauty. Now this could have been pre-hit for when we get the fusions, but even when we get the fusions, I don't think this is the card to hit. Then again, Gaia is a lot of fusion material, so maybe when the fusions come out, this could make sense to be at limit 3, but until we actually see what the meta is like, what the environment is like when those cards come out, we don't even know when we're getting those cards, I don't think Gaia needs to be at 3. Then we have Constructed Desk Worker Tarask. Again, the Worm deck isn't really doing anything. Realistically, is the Worm deck going to play any other limit 3s in the deck? Chances are they're not. You could probably just take Tarask off the list. Then we have Galactica Zyphos. This is a freshly released limit 3 card. I kind of understand the logic behind having this card at limit 3, but I don't really think it's doing much. This card is really hard to use because your opponent has to have a level 7 or 8 monster on the field, which a lot of the time they just won't. And although you can theoretically create some sort of OTK with this, you'd need to God Hand your opponent to actually do that. So I think unlimiting Zyphos would probably be fine. Another card, freshly out, Sea Dragon King Granganus. Now again, I can only assume this card is limited so that you cannot play it alongside Extra Spice and create some sort of weird, bad burn deck. And I kind of understand the logic there, but by putting this to limit 3, we're now stopping the deck from playing any other limit 3s that might actually help the deck. And Sea Serpents is in a really bad spot right now. So having their boss monster limit 3 and basically saying that you're not allowed to use any other limit 3s really doesn't help things. Then we have Ultimate Flag Beast Aim Eagle. This card went to limit 2, basically to try and limit the power of the Mirror Innovator Light Machine deck from way back when. And this was also when Negate Attack also went to 2. Now, I don't know about you, but Light Machine hasn't been a powerhouse deck in quite a long time, so I think this card could probably be freed up and allow us to use that skill again. Then we have Meat and Greed. Once again, you theoretically could use this to OTK, but it's very rarely ever going to happen. Meeg isn't really seeing much play. I say just free the Meeg cards. Thousand Knives is another card I would really like to see unlimited. Now I understand why you might not want to, because this is actually a pretty strong card. You can destroy any monster, so you can destroy fusions, you can destroy face downs, you can destroy maximums, you can get rid of anything with Thousand Knives. But the deck might actually be an okay/playable deck if we actually had this at 3 copies. It's unsearchable, so it's not going to be anything super crazy. Obviously, we'll have the Magician Shuffle skill, which means we will almost always have access to the Dark Magician, which does make Thousand Knives live all the time, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I would really like to see this unhit to see if Dark Magician could be an actual playable deck. Then we have Woolly Wonderland Graveyard Grudge. This card is just really bad. There's no reason for this card to be limit 1. Then we have Mismatched Rivalry, another card that came out and has done literally nothing. No one has ever seen this card see any play whatsoever. Technically, you could use this to summon Curse of Dragon, but you can only summon it during your opponent's turn. I don't know if this card would see any play. I would like to see this unhit just to see if it does see play. I can't foresee this card being particularly good, so I would like to see this unhit. Then we have Insect Rampage. Again, let the insects be free. This has a similar problem to maybe Thousand Knives, where maybe this card becomes like a little bit too good, but I think it'll be fun. Plus, insects aren't doing anything right now, so just let the insects be free. And there we go. That is my wish list / predictions. Now, what do I actually expect to happen? I think Chivalrous Celerity is going to get hit to basically not let you play it with Metarian and probably Elemental Heroes. I actually don't think Dragias Nova is going to get hit whatsoever. I think we probably aren't going to see any kind of hit to Metarion, just because I think Konami is going to think that nerfing the skill so that we can't play Metarion with that is plenty fine. Battle-tested Gaia might get put to 3. I'm not convinced it will, but I think they wouldn't mind putting this card to 3, and that is specifically because this was a free card they gave out anyway, so they won't really care. I also don't think Mirror Geass or Triad Drago will get a hit, because I think Konami, again, is going to look at the data. They're going to see, oh, Gaia did really well, Dragons did nothing, so they're just not going to hit Dragons whatsoever. For the same reason, I don't think that Psychic's going to get any hits. Type Change Beam might get a hit. I would really like this to go down to 1. I would really, really like this to go down to 1. And then when it comes to the unhits, realistically, they could do anything they want. They might just randomly unhit a bunch of stuff. They might not. So it's really hard to say. But this is my wish list, my predictions for what I think is going to happen. Let me know what you think the change is going to be down in the comments. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.